Hello, Angie. This is John Mark Johnson Jr. again, and I have been on a business trip recently. I'm usually on a business trip, and so the areas where I go sometimes usually don't have the best coverage, and they don't always have the best Wi-Fi at the hotels that I stay in. So the conversations that I have with people are sometimes a little jilted, shall we say. They tend to take up a lot more time than would be normal otherwise, so sometimes they drag on for days or weeks or months or years. Doesn't mean that I'm ignoring you or avoiding you or anything like that. It's just I respond to things as I can, and sometimes the conditions prohibit me from being able to do a whole lot. But anyways, I am back now, so I'll go ahead and continue the conversation that I was having with you. And when we last spoke, you had asked me, basically why I'm a Christian, and the two basic reasons that I gave you was, one is that atheism has a lot of built-in assumptions that it really can't justify, and two, God has a way of getting his own. And in responding to that, you said that, basically, I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but you basically said that believing in a fake imaginary being is humorous. And I found that response really interesting, in that from an atheist perspective, why does that matter? I mean, have you seriously thought about it? Why, from an atheistic perspective, does it matter if something is fake and imaginary? What does humorous actually even mean in an atheistic worldview? Humorous to you? Humorous to a particular group of people that you happen to be a part of relative to this subject? Okay, but you're implying, the presence of absolute categories, and you're implying an oughtness to what ought to be believed and what ought not to be believed. You're basically implying a standard of right and wrong. The problem, though, is that in an atheistic worldview, you and I were nothing but fizzing bags of chemicals. That's all we are. We're just a bunch of biological reactions, and the things that we think of and the things that we happen to perceive are all dependent on basically nothing but brain fizz when it comes right down to it. There is no oughtness in that kind of a system. If we are nothing but bags of chemicals, and that is ultimately all that we are as far as our conception of things is concerned, then there really is no oughtness to things. We can say that certain things might be practical for certain outcomes. If a chicken happens to stumble upon a piece of paper that's down on the ground on its level that happens to have a picture of a piece of corn on it, and it starts pecking at that picture of a piece of corn thinking that it's real corn, and it stays there continuing to peck at it thinking that it's real food, yeah, eventually it's going to starve and die. And so that's a negative outcome. But in the grand scheme of things, why does that matter in an atheistic worldview? Life is better than non-life? Not necessarily. Most of the universe is non-life. There's no oughtness to an atheistic worldview. There's no reason why any of these things are actually good or bad in any kind of an absolute sense. If you're going to invoke absolutes, you're going to have to borrow from a system that actually can provide a basis for absolutes. What you're effectively doing, whether you're conscious of it or not, is that to even make the accusation that you're making, you're actually borrowing from my worldview as a biblical Christian. Biblical Christians have an absolute basis for saying that there are indeed absolute things. There are, in fact, absolute laws of logic. There are, in fact, absolute natural laws. There are, in fact, absolute moral laws. And they're all founded in the absolute being of God. An atheistic worldview, though, doesn't have any absolute basis behind things, and because of that, there is no oughtness. There is no, this is definitely right, this is definitely wrong in an atheistic worldview. It doesn't really mean anything when an atheist, if they're being consistent with their atheistic worldview, says that they find something humorous or ridiculous, or they say that it's wrong, because in their worldview there is no real wrong. There might be certain practical implications, but in a universal sense, what does it matter? If the chicken happens to, have a poor perception of reality and it kills itself, what does it matter? What is actually wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with it in any kind of absolute sense from an atheistic worldview. There is no oughtness. And so in order for you to tell me that what I'm believing is in some way humorous or ridiculous or wrong in some sense, you actually have to borrow from my worldview, because my worldview is the one that actually provides an absolute basis for things. Atheists don't have that. Like I said, an atheistic worldview, you and I, we're just bags of fizzing chemicals at the end of the day. And what bags of fizzing chemicals happen to believe or don't believe or do to each other, etc., don't really have any enduring, lasting meaning. It's just chemicals doing what chemicals do, ultimately. There is no oughtness, especially in any kind of absolute sense, from an atheistic point of view. And that's why I asked you if you'd ever seen the Bahnsen-Stein debate. Greg Bahnsen and Gordon Stein were two powerhouses in the worlds in which they traveled. Gordon Stein, very devout atheist, very brilliant man too. You just give him credit where credit's due. He's a smart guy. Comes up with some very good arguments. And Greg Bahnsen, for his part, is a dedicated Reformed Christian. He's a smart guy for his part. And when we saw the two come together in debate, and you can get this debates on YouTube and various other places, just Gordon Stein and Greg Bahnsen, highly encourage you to look it up. When they debated and they started this debate, at the beginning of the debate, it really kind of seemed like Gordon Stein, the atheist, had Greg Bahnsen on the ropes to a certain extent, because he's going through all the proofs for God that have been put forward in the past and all these things, and he's laying out where atheists have responded to it and whatnot. And when Bahnsen has the chance to make his piece, especially in the cross-examination of the debate, which happens later on, that question of why all of this matters in the first place and what basis you have for things becomes prominent. And Bahnsen showed very quickly and very easily that what Stein was actually doing was that he was borrowing from the Christian worldview in order to make any kind of accusation in the first place. If you're going to make the accusation that this is right and this is wrong, and it actually is meaningful, it's not relativistic, it's actually absolute, you can only do that from a worldview that will provide you absolutes, and that's not atheism. Stein was borrowing from the Christian worldview in order to make his claims. And the debate got really interesting after that. So, again, I would really encourage you to watch that debate if you haven't. If you have any other questions or anything that you want to chat with me about, go ahead and send them my way. But yeah, I found your response really interesting, because my response to it is, so what? In your worldview, why is it important if one bag of fizzing chemicals happens to believe in something that is fake or imaginary? Might it diminish my life or the life of beings around me? Maybe, but in the grand scheme of fizzing chemicals, it really doesn't matter. So that would be my question to you. In your worldview, so what? Why does it matter? Thank you very much for your time and attention. Sorry it took so long to get back to you. Hopefully it won't take so long to get back to you in the future, but like I said, I don't always know where I go. The conditions under which I am, not always great coverage, so I'll do the best I can. But until then, thank you very much for your time and consideration, and I really do hope that you have an awesome day. And yes, I do mean that in an absolute sense.